Everything in me wanted to start the 10, 9, 8 countdown. I was like, don't do it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cassie Adams. I'm the youth and young adults pastor here at Denver Community Church. And yeah, thanks. And we're continuing our journey through Acts this morning. And so we're actually going to just dive right in. So there's Bibles under the pew. We're going to be on page 759 if you're using one of those. But we're starting in Acts chapter 2 this morning in verse 42. And reading to verse 47, it says, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved." So contextually, we're in this season right now where there's a ministry handoff happening. Jesus spent 3 years journeying on dusty roads with his followers and teaching them. And now we're in this season where he's no longer with them physically in the flesh, but he has given them the Spirit to continue the work of building his kingdom. And in the following of receiving this Holy Spirit, Peter gives this big sermon, this big message, and he gives it in this time where there's a celebration going on called Pentecost, which is a massive Jewish holiday celebrating when Moses went up the mountain and then came down with the law. And so there's a lot of people present, and it says that they added 3,000 to their number following this message. And so that brings us to today's passage, and Luke has this tendency, this habit of pivoting in and out of detailed narratives and then going into summaries. And this is actually the very first summary that he turns into in the book of Acts. And so what we're looking at now is this passage of time where things are happening that he's describing. And this passage is really interesting because there's a lot of different takes. There's a vast array of ideologies around what this is trying to say. In August, I took our high schoolers on retreat, and upon return, we stopped in Manitou Springs so we could have lunch and mess around at the penny arcade for a little bit. And the plan was for each of the leaders to pick a cuisine, and the students would go whatever they were hungry for. And to my great surprise, none of them wanted soup. So I had that meal alone. And I ended up at this deli, and it was really interesting because I came in and this kind old man asked me what I was doing, and I said, "I'm on this retreat with these youth," and he was like, "Oh, do you know the scriptures? Is it that kind of youth group?" And I was like, yeah, you could say that. And he immediately was like, "Do you know the story in Acts chapter 2? And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with it." And he's like, "Me and all these other men, we co-own this restaurant together, and we live like Acts chapter 2. And he hands me this little pamphlet. And it wasn't until later that I'm sitting at it, and I was like, "Oh, he was trying to get me to join his cult." I was like, "Oh, okay." But they read that and they were like, "Oh, I'm supposed to give all things and live in community in this model that looks like the early church." And then you have this other side where I grew up Presbyterian, and in my church, monthly we had a potluck, and we called it Acts 2:42 because we were eating together. And that was our definition of the passage. And so you have this huge gamut where it's is this like a commune, or is this the generosity of bringing my Jell-O salad because fellowship, baby? And so as I'm looking at this, I want to invite you all on this journey today as we kind of pick this apart, and we're okay, what is this actually saying? So This group, it says in the passage, is devoted to 4 things. And the word devoted here means to give constant attention to. So some of us are devoted to our phones. Some of us are devoted to the happy and never depressing news thread. Some of us are devoted to our worries and anxieties. My wife could make the case that I'm devoted to my favorite F1 driver, Max Verstappen. But regardless, this community was giving constant attention to, they were devoted to 4 things. And so the first thing they were devoted to, it says, was the apostles' teaching. And the apostles were the group of 12 that were Jesus' inner circle. Now at this time, Judas had been replaced with the man Matthias, according to the group's decision. But they're giving this teaching, and what this kind of suggests is that, Peter's sermon is not a one-off. When Jesus ascended, the very last instruction he gave to his followers was to go out into all of the world, making disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all I have taught you. And so it's clear in this passage that they took that seriously. They heard that instruction, and they're living it out. They're embodying it. The second thing that they're devoted to is fellowship. The word used here is koinonia, and it's often used in the mutuality of marriage. We're talking about intimate relationship and shared life. The kind of life that is so connective, it reaches to every corner of the community, and they're doing it together. And they're devoted to that community and that intimacy and that connection. The third thing that they have devoted themselves to, beyond the teaching and the connection of community, is the breaking of bread. And some might say, this is the Lord's Supper, right? Breaking of bread. But that word actually is often used as just the common meal. And we don't really have to wrestle with it much, because in the early church, when they first started doing the Lord's Supper, it was almost always in the setting of a shared common meal. And so we have this group that is devoted to the teaching and to gathering together with even the daily habits of a meal. And then we get to the fourth thing that they are devoted to. The fourth thing they're devoted to is prayer. And what we kind of see in this passage, it says that they were continuing to go to the temple daily, is that this group still sees themselves as Jewish. And they're still devoted to the Jewish rituals, the daily prayers, the showing up in the synagogue and the temple. And I would imagine they were also giving themselves to the Lord's Prayer, which Jesus taught them. And so we have this picture being painted of a group who's hungry to learn what Jesus had taught the apostles, that they were devoted to this connection and this intimate community that was being built, and that covered physical daily ritual and their spiritual practices. And all of this culminates this outflow of generosity. It's interesting, in verse 44 and 45, it says they had all things in common to the degree that they were selling their own possessions and properties to meet the needs of those in the community. And so this is where we kind of get some different perspectives. What does this mean? What does this look like? And I want to pause. And I want to invite you guys to a posture when it comes to teaching here. My hope for us is that whenever you hear a teaching or a message, that you would recognize it as the beginning of the conversation, not the end. Okay? Anything coming from this platform, whether it's me or Hannah or Colby or any of our guest teachers, that you would take that as an opportunity for something to wrestle with through your week, to dig into for yourself, that we're not up here with this irrefutable capital T truth that you must submit to, okay? We're inviting you to the curiosity and the exploration of the scriptures and these ideas, and we're giving you kind of a launching point, okay? And so that's what I want to invite you into. And so instead of telling you what I think is happening here, I'm going to paint for you 3 different perspectives and why people believe those. And then you get to do with that what you will, all right? So, the first idea. People often look at this passage as a philosophical ideal. And here's why. In the book of Acts, chapter 2, as Luke is painting this picture, he starts to use phrases that look a whole lot like, and sometimes even identical to, Plato's The Republic. This philosophical scheme and utopian dream for what society could look like under his republic. And the phrase that really connects it is the phrase, all things in common. Okay? And so Plato, it's interesting, he actually starts this kind of manifesto about the republic in this like kind of casual conversation with a friend about how he thinks that it would be really great if society chose your wives and we all just shared them. It's kind of odd. I don't know about it. But but one of the things he says guardians. And I don't know who decides who the guardians are. But guardians will have all things in common. They must live in common houses and meet at common meals. None of them will have anything specially his or her own. They will be together and they will be brought up together and will associate at gymnastics exercise. And so they will be drawn by a necessity of their natures to have intercourse with each other. And so this is this paragraph, and it's not a precise reflection of Luke, but you can see the idea, these common meals, having all things in common. It's this ideal, and the reality is this work by Plato is not a history. It's a fantasy. And so people look at that and they look at the comparisons and they think, oh, Luke is tying things together to get them to think philosophically about how amazing this community was. So Luke's just exaggerating. He's just painting this grand ideal. And so that's where some people land. There's another group that looks at this and they look at the context historically and they say, no, this was literal. This was real. We look at the Pythagorean cult that might have inspired, and a lot of the language was there as well for giving your goods to be a part of it. But there's also a Jewish community in that time in first century Palestine who they, in order to participate, gave everything to the community and had it as shared goods. And this was a group of Jewish mystics. And actually, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls at a site called Qumran, which was an archaeological dig site for an Essene community. And so that was even an example of early Christians taking that seriously. And so some people look at this and they go, we are supposed to be living in this kind of communistic way, right? And so that's how you end up with my deli friend and many others who are like, we need to live into this. And so they take it very seriously and they take it very holistically. But there's a third group who also takes it literally, but they kind of take a step back because they're looking at some other context clues in the scriptures. So the first kind of contextual thing they're looking at is the story of Ananias and Sapphira. This is a story about a husband and a wife who sold their property, and they told the church, we're going to donate everything we received to you. But they secretly held some back. And they lied to the church, and it says they lied to the Holy Spirit, and they died. We'll get to that when we get to that. But what's happening here, Peter kind of calls them on this, and what he says here, interestingly, is not that they're in trouble for not giving everything, but for their deceit. He says, this was your belongings, and when you sold it, was that money not still yours? Yet you chose to deceive the Holy Spirit and the church. And so there's this image here where they were trying to look so generous that they lied about what they were doing and how they were moving through the world. They were painting a false picture of who they were. And that was the problem, because it was theirs to give. And so that's an interesting story in this context where people are thinking that you're supposed to just give everything automatically upon joining, right? If they have the choice of how much they give and whether they give, it's not necessarily a perfect reflection of the Essene community, which was rigorous. The other thing that they grab onto is in our passage when it says they sold their property and possessions. That word sold is an ongoing verb. It's showing that I see a need and I sell something and I meet the need. And I see a need and I sell something and I meet the need. And so some people read that verbiage and they go, no, this is not supposed to be like an all-in community. This is about the generosity of the community. And so these are 3 different ways people look at this and grapple with this, and I'll let you continue to sit with it and look around and decide what you think. But what I want to invite us to is to kind of take a step back. I want us to look at the overarching flow of what is happening here. Because what we see is that regardless of how literal and willful this might be, the overarching picture here is that the devotion to teaching and togetherness results in a community where all needs are met. Whether that's an idea or actually happening, this is the trajectory. There's teaching coming, there's community happening, and the needs are being met. And so I wonder to myself as I look at this, okay, what was the teaching that was resulting in this kind of lifestyle? And so I started to look at what Jesus said about money. And he said a lot about money, actually. But a few of the things he kind of locks in on is he says that you cannot serve both God and money. He said it's really hard for the rich to enter the kingdom. He says that you should be on your guard against all kinds of greed, that life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And so there's this thread through his teachings where he's warning against the pursuit of wealth. When someone makes that their goal and their pursuit and it becomes their identity, when they give in to greed, he warns against that. But there's something else that he says that I think is really interesting in the context of this early community. He said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." He gives this picture for us that what we care about most, our wealth goes towards. And where our wealth goes, it paints a picture to everyone about our priorities. Now imagine a community that is devoted to one another, that is doing life together, daily practice and spiritual rhythms, and they have intimate, connective relationship. And their heart is with the community. That's where the funds are going. It's a natural flow, and it reflects this proverb of Jesus that he gives us, that where our treasure is, our heart will be also. It's interesting, Acts chapter 4, Luke gives us another summary that kind of mirrors today's. And in that one, he says that none of them considered their possessions as their own. And I want to look at that in light of a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 6, which says, "Godliness with contentment is great gain. For you brought nothing into this world, and you are going to take nothing out of it." What does it look like for a community who postures themselves with the idea that I didn't bring anything into this world, I'm not taking anything out of it, I am certainly not white-knuckling every penny I've earned, that my wealth and all that I have actually exists so that I can love well. That's what it looked like. So if our value is community, our money will flow in that direction. And I wonder if what we're looking at, if it surpasses this recipe for community that I think a lot of people get lost in when they're looking at this passage. They're like, is it supposed to be like this? Is it supposed to look like that? Am I supposed to give everything? Am I supposed to just feel generosity at a whim? And people are wrestling with this instead of stepping back and recognizing that what's actually happening here is a reminder of the divine value of economic justice that this community had and lived in and walked in. And the way this works is the intimacy factor. Because when you're close to something, you see it. Distance allows us to not take responsibility. I think about the story of the Good Samaritan. Those religious leaders who saw someone at harm and they passed on the far side of the road, not mine to deal with. But the one who came close and near and saw him and cared for him, that was the true neighbor. And so the invitation into intimacy produces responsibility. We are called close to one another, to see one another, that we may care for one another. Proverbs 21:3 says that to do justice is more godly than sacrifice. And I think about this idea of maybe even just giving to the church, which is really, really important, and it participates in all these things. But I think our mandate actually goes beyond that. That sacrifice is still not like the walking in justice per se. And I wonder if this idea of people talk about, giving thoughts and prayers, and there's this response that I see that says, you are supposed to be the answer to the prayer. What does it look like to live and walk as the answer to the prayers? And so this call into justice is to get close enough to see and then to move and act, to take responsibility for that, to hold each other, to cover each other, to protect each other, to care for one another. There's this call at hand to live into this. And I was tempted, sitting in this passage, to write a rousing, eat the rich sermon. I was. It's still kind of tempting, because I think we're a little tired. But as I was sitting in this, I asked myself, what is the message for me and my community? And yes, pursuit of economic justice as a nation and as a world is something we absolutely should be walking into, giving into, voting for, thinking toward, protesting toward. Absolutely. But the sermon I have for you today isn't for the 1%. It's for us. And what happens if I just blame them for everything happening is I now no longer have to walk in it. It's not my fault. And it's too big to fix. So I'm just going to do my thing. I'm just going to take care of me and maybe like my little inner circle. I'm going to keep my head down. And there's this invitation to something so much bigger that's at hand here. Get close. Don't let them take anything else from you, including the responsibility of care. So, how do we embody this? I'm thinking of 3 groups today. The first group that comes to mind for me is those of you that are in this community and you're locked in and you see the people around you as family, and you're like in that rhythm. My invitation for you is to continue to look up with great intent. Seek out the needs, connect one another. And not all of us have finances to give, but we might have encouragement and edification and presence and time. There's a lot of ways to make sure that all needs are met, because not every need is financial. And so if you're plugged in here, I want you to make sure, reflect, am I looking, am I seeing, and am I acting? Am I being the answer to the prayers of my community? The second group I'm thinking of is those who are disconnected. Maybe you've come to a couple things, and there's this kind of frustration of like, I'm just not plugging in. I'm just not finding community here yet. I'm feeling kind of isolated. I'm feeling kind of like I don't belong. And before I invite you to anything, I just want to express so much compassion for that. In my 20s, I was trying to find a church. And my brother was a youth pastor in Littleton, and I was like, well, that's easy. I'll just drive there, be there. Surely it'll be easy to plug in if he's there. And I was volunteering, and I was attending things, and I was going to women's events, and I wasn't making deep connections. I was so lonely. And I remember sitting one Sunday morning as the pastor described how this community was family, and I cried because I was like, sure, bud, I don't feel that at all. And it did take time. It took way more time than I wanted it to. I have this impatience built into me. But I eventually finally made a connection because I kept showing up and I kept leaning in, and I know that's hard. But my invitation, if this is you this morning, is to keep fighting. Don't let yourself get isolated. Keep showing up. We're here. I want more friends. Come talk to me afterwards. We have the men's group. We have the women's group, which is going on retreat this weekend, and there's still spots open if you want to jump on. We have our learning journeys, which I think you could probably still join Spirit Reimagined. We're only 1 week into that course together, and that is an extremely communal space. We have volunteer opportunities with Project Renew. There's endless ways to touch in. You saw that with the community fair we had a little while ago. The Participate Corner exists for a reason. And so I'm not saying all this, I don't want to bring any shame into this space. Like, just love. I don't want you alone. I don't want you cut off. I don't want you isolated. I don't want you unseen. So put your net in again. The third group that I want to talk to this morning is those who have a hard time receiving. Some of you are extremely present and generous, but to make your needs known feels like an impossibility. You have been dismissed and hurt for exposing needs. You've been pushed out for having needs. You've been told, I'm supposed to just suck it up. I got to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I'm my own man. And yet this faith follows and pursues and seeks to model a man who let women fund his ministry, a man who wept openly in front of his followers and his people, a man who let a child donate his bread and fish for lunch, a man who on the cross asked John to look after his mother in his absence, modeling this vulnerability and this openness and this willingness to receive. Relationship is reciprocal. And so, once again, I just have so much compassion for those who are like, I just can't let you in. It's too vulnerable. It's not for me. I invite you to wrestle with that, challenge that. We give and we receive, we breathe in and we breathe out. That is community. And so that's the invitation. This morning, as we shift into Eucharist, I think about this idea that God gave everything in pursuit of relationship with us. It's this great example of giving in order to connect, and connecting that he would be Emmanuel, God with us, in order to give. It's modeled so beautifully. And so as I welcome you to the table this morning, I invite you to be aware of this great gift that is at hand for you. and of this beautiful example that we are invited to model. I'm going to read the passage from Matthew. But before I do that, I'm going to give us some reminders. All the bread is gluten-free. The tall cup with the stem has wine. The short cup has juice. I invite you to come down the center and the outside and to leave up the diagonals. So in Matthew it says, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." And then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." We practice open communion here. That means everyone is welcome. So come to the table.